So today's Lunch and Learn, we're going to talk a little bit about the PMO Service Catalogue. It appears in a number of the courses that we deliver, and it's something sometimes gets confused with some other documentation. So I thought it was worth spending 45, 50 minutes over lunch to talk about this PMO Service Catalogue. So for those of you who don't know PMO, PMO Learning, we are a specialist training organisation that cater specifically for people who work in PMOs. So we do cover project and program management topics, so things like benefits management, assurance, governance, but we do everything from a PMO perspective. Not only that, is we're also very precious about our training team, and every member of our training team has relevant project PMO management experience. So and a number of our trainers are still actually doing a PMO management role, take time out of their schedule to deliver training for us throughout the year. So if you come along to one of our sessions, you're guaranteed to find somebody who has an understanding of the challenges and some tactics and strategies to overcome those challenges when working in a PMO. So the purpose of today's session is really just to provide this understanding of why we have a PMO Service Catalogue, how it's used, who uses it, and what some of the benefits might be. And I decided for this Lunch and Learn, I've got a little challenge that I've put in for everybody who's on the call, and we'd be really interested in our LinkedIn group if you wanted to post in there some of the challenges of putting or of addressing that challenge or completing that challenge, and perhaps how it made you think differently about what's happening in and around PMOs. So the service catalogue is very much based on this concept of a service-based PMO. So I just, as a little bit of background to the service catalogue, just a reminder of the difference between a support-based PMO and a service-based PMO. Now, we use the analogy of a kitchen. If you think about your kitchen at home, your parents and your friends, it tends to have somebody typically in the kitchen who's prepared, you know, if you're there at kind of meal times, food times, they'll say, I fancy something to eat, I'll see what I've got in the cupboard. Off they go to their pantry or the equivalent, and they will have a selection of different food items, some of which they can put together and provide something that might be called a meal. Certainly they'll be able to provide some sustenance, but essentially what they're able to cook at that time depends on what's in the pantry. And we've all got those items in the pantry, haven't we? We've just moved my in-laws to be close to us, and we found some paprika that was older than my working daughter, which we kind of, you know, we've all got kind of that stuff in the cupboard that we don't use very often, taking up time and space. We may in our kitchens have a range of tools, utensils and equipment that we use, and who hasn't got the set of 3 cheese knives? Yes, that we all bought, thinking we're bound to get that out every time we get a cheese board, and we just use a common garden sharp knife when we do it. So we've all kind of bought things in our kitchens, and there are some times when people come along and ask us for something. My grandson particularly comes along and say, Grandma, have we got any prawns? And I don't always have prawns in my fridge. So sometimes we aren't able to provide the things that some of our kind of our visitors might want. And when we think about a support-based PMO, it's very much like that kind of kitchen at home, where people generally kind of want to help, want to provide, limited by resources, limited by capability, limited by equipment, limited by time to actually kind of deliver. But we will do things on a best endeavours basis. And there's some real challenges about working in a support-based PMO, positive things in terms of, you know, you get a chance to do, you know, try your hand at a huge number of things. Some of the more difficult challenges are trying to kind of plan what you're going to be doing on a week-to-week basis, planning development of the team, doing some kind of roadmap to develop better services. And a lot of PMOs, and particularly small PMOs or PMOs in low maturity, low project program management maturity organizations are very much around this kind of support-based bit, like our kitchens at home. We'll try to do what we can, help where we can, we'll develop our skills, buy more, kind of have more materials available, more tools to help, but very much on a kind of an ad hoc basis. And there is an argument that's very customer focused, in terms of, well, we'll buy the equipment in as people want them, but the danger is you end up with that pantry there with lots of things that are used once and never used again. Where we're talking of a service-based PMO, we're thinking here very much more of a professional restaurant or kitchen. So what we've got when you go to a restaurant, typically when you're going out for a meal, the first question you want to ask is, what do we fancy tonight? Do we fancy a steak? Oh, do you fancy a good Chinese? Oh, I fancy Thai tonight. So you already kind of have got some preconceived ideas, depending on which restaurant you go to, as to what kind of services are going to be provided. So, a bit like kind of, is it a project office, a program office? Again, an idea of the kind of the level of activity or the level of service that you're going to get from that particular office. Behind that, what you've got is a well-stacked, orderly pantry, hopefully, unless you've seen kind of some of the Gordon Ramsay ones, but you've got some kind of well-stacked cupboards and pantries there with all of the right food that's tailored and purchased to actually kind of that drives the menu that's been delivered by that particular restaurant. And behind that, what you've also got are some well kind of experienced, well allocated chefs that are tailored to specific dishes that they are experienced or they're being kind of trained up to cook. And again, if we kind of take this analogy to our PMO, what we're saying is that as PMOs mature, as their organizations mature, we have a much better understanding. We start making decisions on actually what services do we want to deliver for the organization. So, we've all seen kind of Stuart's book where we can deliver hundreds of different services. P3 or Appendix F talks about, kind of all of the different types of services. But actually where we want to be is an understanding of how best we can use the skills and the capability in our organization. What does our organization need? And then get a defined list of services that we provide with our PMO. Now, interestingly, having kind of talked about this a while, somebody said actually, but the good thing about a support-based PMO is that customers know they can come and ask us for everything. And the danger is if we've got a purely kind of service-based PMO that does nothing but kind of what's written in our menu of services, then actually we haven't got any latitude to try new things. And I think the interesting bit is what we're not saying it's 100% service-based. So again, much to my husband's disgust, whenever we go to a restaurant, I typically will go off menu. Yes, so I will ask for something, an additional side dish or something kind of slightly different to what's on the menu, but I can't go into a Thai restaurant, yes, and ask for burger and chips. There's a complete kind of mismatch there, and they won't have the ingredients, the skills, or the time or the inclination to be able to cook that. But what we can do in our PMOs, some of the services that we can provide, or we can say actually 80% of our time is spent doing the services we know we have to deliver that the organization needs, and we leave 20% of our PMO to actually do the kind of the ad hoc, the one-offs, and we do that on a best endeavors basis. So you don't have to go fully 100% service-based, but actually the more we can kind of demonstrate the value of specific services, the more value we can add to our organization. So the whole kind of, unsurprisingly, this concept of a service catalogue is very much kind of predicated around having a service-based PMO. So we define a service, and I say we define, this is part of the materials for the essentials courses from the House of PMO, but we define a service as one or more activity undertaken to produce an output for a customer that delivers a desired outcome for the organization. So I'm just going to pull that apart in terms of the definition. When we say we're producing an output, we're actually going to kind of give somebody something. Now that might be the minutes of a meeting, it might be, you know, kind of a governance structure, it might be a process, it might be a report. But the end of that delivery of a service, we're going to hand something. Now it doesn't necessarily need to be a physical handover, it can be kind of, we make it available online or soft copy or some other means for a customer of the PMO. But the only reason we do that, because we know that in delivering that service, we're improving something, we're helping the organization to achieve something. So let me give you some kind of context or some examples of that might put this into a little bit more sense for you who've come across this for the first time. So, for example, an organization has identified that their ability to manage risks is very low. And so the organization has a desire, has an aim to improve risk management in the organization. So one of the services the PMO might provide is to facilitate a risk identification workshop for every project in the first 6 weeks of initiation. So, you know, the delivery of that workshop and potentially the outputs from that workshop, which might include a risk register and some additional kind of findings. It might even kind of get to do some risk analysis as well. The only reason why we do that is because we're helping the organization get better at risk management. Okay. We're not doing it because textbooks say organizations need to manage risks on projects. We're not just doing it because a project manager says, I want you to do that risk identification workshop for me. Any service that we provide has to link back to what the organization is hoping to achieve in improving their project and program delivery capability. And I think that's an important concept around some of the services. Again, we have a number of you know, experienced PMO practitioners who go into organizations and start telling the organization, oh, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, because it's in best practice. And, you know, I've done this in other organizations and it added value. And we have to actually kind of go back to what the organization needs and agrees they need, because there's sometimes a difference between what people want and what people need. And having those conversations, we should be able to align all of the services that we provide to what the organization recognizes that they need. So that's where we are in terms of services. And just want to then kind of take that to the next step. If we're going to be delivering services, there are what I would suggest 3 key elements of documentation that sit behind this. So let's just cover them and we'll kind of go off into the catalogue in a little bit more detail. Firstly, a PMO service strategy. This is a document that not a huge amount of organizations have. It's typically in organizations where we have a PMO director, because this document looks at when PMOs are going to exist, how they're going to exist, and how they decide what type of services they're going to deliver. It would include things like any strategic change project will have a dedicated PMO working for them. Organizational departments will be supported by a PMO in each location. All portfolio services will be delivered by the Enterprise Portfolio Office. Individual project and program officers will be supporting individual projects and programs, but all finance services will be delivered by a finance PMO, which will sit centrally within the Enterprise PMO Office. So it has that kind of overall view of the overall integrated PMO model, and how it'll be decided how those services and potentially what level of services are going to be delivered. It's owned by the PMO director, and it provides that kind of initial framework for each PMO manager within their own PMOs to know the scope of their PMO and the types of services that need to be offered. So the PMO Service Catalogue, I will touch on it here, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail. So each PMO should have its own PMO Service Catalogue that lists, essentially running your own restaurant, yes, that lists the services that your PMO delivers. So it's owned by the PMO manager. And it's essentially when people come to your PMO, you can say, this is what we do. Now you're going to have things in that service catalogue that we are, we are hoping to deliver. They can be things that are actually mandated, but it can also include optional services, and it also can include details of perhaps services that you used to deliver, so archived services that are perhaps no longer required or less of a priority, or you haven't got the resources to deliver. So that's your PMO Service Catalogue. And the other key documentation is your PMO Operations Handbook. In your PMO Operations Handbook are all of the processes and procedures, kind of the workings of your PMO in terms of how you deliver each of those services, any monitoring and control of the PMO services, but also the PMO monitoring of the PMO itself. So just got a question there in chat about having an overarching PMO catalogue. Part of the kind of the PMO service strategy might actually list the services, but may not necessarily have all of the detail, I would suggest. And what becomes really interesting, kind of one of the benefits of doing this is that if we see that we're sitting in a project office and we're going to be delivering the risk identification workshop service, but we might also be doing some resourcing and skills services, we can look at other PMOs or go to some kind of central repository where there's some standard information, and we can take it and then tailor it for the final kind of tweaking. So we might get 80% of a standard process and then bring it and say, actually, when we deliver it in our PMO, then actually we've got we want to tailor it slightly, and we'll come on to some of the fields that are sitting there in the PMO service catalogue to do that. Where there may be more significant differences in your PMO operations handbook. So your actual kind of the service that you provide, and as I say, we're going to go through the fields in that in a moment, may be quite standard, but one part of the organization might be using an automated tool. In another part of the organization, quite legitimately, it might actually be looked after through a manual process. So the actual kind of the mechanisms that you do, and again, in one part of the organization, you've got the standard process, but you do it weekly. In another part of the organization, but at a program office, then you might do it monthly, but actually there's a little bit more involved or a little bit more detail. So the service catalogue, I think, has a much more commonality across an organization than perhaps the operations handbook. So let's go and have a look at the PMO Service Catalogue in a little bit more detail now. I don't know whether people have seen this textbook. So this is the PMO Service Catalogue. It was a book that has been, I think it's been out now about 2 years. Which is an insight into what PMOs do. And what Stuart Dixon did, he blew out Appendix F from the P3O manual and essentially wrote a PMO service catalogue for last count, I think it was about 235 services. So he did that kind of 80% fit, and it's a great textbook to go and say, well, actually, what kind of services can we do? Can we kind of take what's in that service catalogue and use that as a starter for 10 for doing our service catalogue within our own organisation? Obviously what Stuart couldn't do was write the operations handbook because of the different kind of people and places and locations and tools that are used in different organizations. And for those of you who don't know, kind of the House of PMO is just about to start a project to kind of refresh the PMO Service Catalogue to make it not necessarily the textbook bigger, certainly to provide a broader range, an even bigger range of services, but some will be online rather than in the textbook. So this is a kind of a good starter for 10, but what I want to talk about today is about how we develop some of the entries in that service catalogue and some of the challenges and some of the benefits of actually having all of those different fields, and just the thought process of going through actually developing service catalogue entries for the things that we do. I think it was Churchill who said the benefit is not just in doing of having a plan, but actually kind of going through the planning process, because that's where all of the kind of the real thinking that takes place. That means execution is so much easier. So on the left hand side is we've got the fields that Stuart's got listed in the service catalogue. On the right hand side are some other potential fields that you might want to write about each of those services. And again, one of the things we'll be doing at the House of PMO is to look at what's included. But in your organization, you can choose whatever fields, whatever structure you want for your service catalogue. I'm just, as I said, going to talk you through a few of these fields to think about why you might have them in, some of the thought processes you might have to go through in order to get them clarified for your entry within the service catalogue. So the first one I want to do, which sometimes people think about the service description, is what the actual service provides for the customer. So this is a clear description of what it is you're actually going to get out of the other end. It's not the reasoning for that. Remember, we talked about we're going to have an output, and it really is describing that output and how that can be utilized, in the project or program at a portfolio level. So again, actually providing some clarity, but also having that what the service is actually going to deliver allows us to think very carefully about, from an operational perspective, what do we have to have in place, what quality aspects, what criteria do we need to have in place to deliver that service effectively for the customer. The second one, I think, is really an interesting one in terms of, well, why are the PMO doing this? Because typically a number of the services that we provide, particularly when it's in project and program support, so it might be maintaining the project schedule, it may be maintaining the cost model, it may be updating the progress reports on a weekly basis, can be argued, well, surely that's a project manager's job or a program manager's job. Why are we doing that in the PMO? And in the PMO competence framework, the House of PMO say we will often be doing things where it's more cost effective for us to do so, or where we want to, on behalf of the organisation, maintain a level of control or consistency that perhaps couldn't be achieved by it being done by lots of individuals deciding their own way of doing things. So this is, we have to be able to justify why we're providing that service. Now, one of the reasons why I think this is really important is because the why we're delivering the service has to be underpinned with the right level of governance and delegated authority from senior management that essentially gives us the permission, the mandate, and the support to be able to deliver that service. So when we go to project and program managers and say, I need your weekly report, we don't get the, who are you to be asking me for a weekly report? Yes, and actually, well, I'll get it to you when I feel like it. We go there with the authority of a senior manager within the organization, with an understanding in terms of how we're going to be using the information that we're asking, or the kind of the insisting that we kind of do a follow-up process, or we mandate a particular kind of milestone or a particular tool, has to be justified by the need by the organization. And so, you know, what the service provides for the customer and why is the service being offered are two very distinct, different elements to consider around that service. How the PMO will deliver the service should be laying out what the interaction is between the customers and the providers of inputs for that particular service. And in the service catalogue, we have something called a SIPOC table. Anybody got a wild guess as to why it's called a SIPOC table? Who can type it in the fastest? Yes, it's just the initials of the 5 different columns that are there in the SIPOC table. Now, we've done this as a table. I quite like this as a swim lanes diagram in an actual kind of service catalogue, but that sometimes can be quite convoluted, but I definitely think it adds a lot. So in a SIPOC table, what we're doing is the PMO is going to get some inputs from a number of suppliers, and then from that we're going to follow a process, and then we'll produce some outputs for some specific customers. Now, when we're documenting the service, this is a really useful table because it provides us and forces us to ask several questions. But it also helps us recognize that even though we might be the people who is doing that process in the middle column, any service we promise to a customer, we are also then assuming we've got the supply chain of information. So if senior managers say to us, we would like a monthly report on projects, and we say, absolutely, the PMO is going to deliver that, or, you know, kind of worse, if that's the right context, we want to do a weekly report, we have to recognize that when we say that, we are committing the project and program managers essentially to find time in their diaries to produce that on a weekly or monthly basis. So part of kind of developing your service catalogue is balancing that kind of what the customers are asking for, how much time and effort we're going to have to input for the process itself, but also recognizing what we're going to be asking other departments, not just the project and program managers. If we're going to produce a monthly report that has finance information in it, then actually those suppliers are going to be the finance department or access to the finance system to be able to extract that information from. And again, with the inputs and outputs, it's important to recognize where that, what format that is actually going to be delivered to us from. And interestingly, whether we want to set any standards, I hate to use that word, template, yes, whether, you know, we're going to dictate the structure, the format of that, those inputs into our process. And again, we've talked a little bit about the outputs. And I think what also kind of the SIPOC diagram will show us, or does show us, is that not all of our PMO customers are necessarily the PMO suppliers. They can be quite different groups. So we can be delivering a service to the senior managers, so, you know, that is perhaps not of any benefit to the project managers, but they're suppliers to that information. And again, you know, I haven't done the role over several years, very often project and program managers say, why are we providing this information? What is it going to go into? And actually having your kind of SIPOC table actually says, this is what we're going to be doing with that information. And these are the end customers, and this is what they're going to be using that for. So I do think the SIPOC table, you know, kind of having those conversations with the customers, the suppliers, being very clear about the inputs and outputs really helps to clarify how much work and effort, and to really challenge, is this where we want to be spending our time? Is it worth the effort to actually kind of deliver this service on behalf of the organization? Now, this is a real challenging one, and I think this is absolutely crucial in terms of how we will measure the value of that service. So going back to kind of, why is the service being offered to the customer? Yes, we have to be able to go back and say, whatever that reason is, we can demonstrate over time that this service is actually achieving what the organization set out to achieve. So if we're going back to our risk identification workshops, yes, is that actually leading to an improvement in risk management across the organization? Okay, so, you know, we're not talking about kind of metrics and measures here today in detail, but what I find is a lot of PMOs spend their time, when they start looking at their own performance, report on how busy they are. So, you know, kind of, how many risk identification workshops did we do last month? 7. Great, but what did it achieve? Did it actually achieve an increased awareness in, you know, kind of risks for the project? Did it mean that we had a greater level of mitigations? Did it mean we had a better contingency pot set aside around projects? So we really need to start thinking about, how are we going to measure the success of the individual service, which then contributes to actually the overall value of the PMO. And this, I think, is one of the most difficult fields to complete when it comes into when you're developing your service catalogue. And interestingly, it becomes very difficult to do this one if you don't understand why you're doing the service in the first place. So they're absolutely linked. Oh, let's go back one. What was the next one that was there? Yes, so the next one we want to talk about is the PMO capabilities. So for each particular service, we'll take a level of knowledge, skills, and behaviors and competence in order for the PMO individuals to deliver that service. And again, we've got lots of examples where PMOs, where they've got a particular set of skills, actually have a desire to deliver kind of portfolio level services, but don't necessarily have the right people in their PMO organization to be able to, you know, they don't have the knowledge, don't have the experience to deliver those services. And it's an interesting one in terms of, you know, kind of what's the tail and what's the dog. If the organization needs a set of services, perhaps we have to go back and say, well, actually, these are the capabilities needed to deliver that service, and we haven't got them. So we cannot deliver that service, or we need to kind of recruit, procure the right kind of services or capability in order to deliver that service. So again, this, whoever our PMO sponsor is, or the senior management, we can kind of go back and say, this is a service that actually will add value. This is how we can measure how it adds value. And at the minute, we can't do that because we don't have the capability in order to deliver that. And I think the one that I would pick in particularly from the other side is around performance expectations and any service level agreements. Now, when I first started kind of working with this, there was lots of conversations that were saying, well, actually, these are all service level agreements that the PMO promised to their customers. So if we take minutes at a senior management meeting, then we commit to getting the output out to you within, you know, kind of 4 working days. If we're doing an impact assessment on a risk, we promise to do that within 2 working days, whatever those service level agreements or expectations might be. But I think once we feel empowered because we're living or delivering the services that are required by the organization, where we have the mandate from senior management to deliver them, then actually we can also be saying there are service level agreements, there are expectations that we have from our customers. So if you want us to deliver your, kind of put your schedule together, there's a minimum set of information that you need to be able to provide for us. There's a great sign that says, forgetfulness on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. So, they can't come and demand things within an unreasonable kind of time scale. And actually, we are not there necessarily just to compensate when they haven't fulfilled their side of their contribution. So interestingly, in terms of, these are not just service level agreements against the PMO, but they are kind of service level agreements or expectations from our customer to engage in the service. Just a quick question for anybody on the call. Has anybody on the call written a service catalogue? Any other fields that you think that you had in your service catalogue or wish you'd had in your service catalogue when you created it? Happy anybody wants to shout out loud, or you can just kind of stick it in chat if you want to. It's all gone quiet. Your fingers are all full of food, pushing it into your mouth. It's okay. As I say, it's interesting in terms of, I'm doing some work with an organization at the moment, and they're supporting them in the development of their service catalogue, and they've come up with a kind of slightly different set of fields in terms of what they want. So there's no absolutely fixed. Stuart's got some in his book. There's another list there. The House of PMO will come up with a consolidated list when they finish their project. So going back to kind of the Churchill piece about actually writing the service catalogue, so even if you feel as though you've not got a fully service-based PMO, thinking about what you do in your organization and trying to find, trying to write the entry for those services is a really helpful exercise to help you think about why you're delivering the service, who you're delivering the service to, what is the benefit to the organization, what are the expectations. So just a final bit then that I just wanted to cover off in terms of kind of who uses the service catalogue. Certainly from a PMO manager's perspective, it's a useful tool to have to be able to go and talk to project program managers, senior managers, to say, this is what we do. This is kind of what you can expect from us. We still have lots of questions in terms of a PMO can mean many things to different people. Your service catalogue, your PMO service catalogue can help you state quite clearly and help people understand the scope of your PMO and what you do. PMO analysts and administrators, again, supplemented by the PMO operations handbook. It's a great way when you kind of join the organization or you kind of move around the organization to understand what you're doing, what's expected from you, and again, how you perhaps might relate to some of the other things that are happening in your PMO. I think it's also really good when you're applying for a job, or when you're, kind of moving across the organization, you ask to have a look at the service catalogue of the PMO you're about to join, because again, you can see where there are potentially development opportunities or areas where perhaps we're in that kind of capabilities section where you recognize that actually you perhaps need to improve some knowledge or skills in order to be able to kind of deliver some of those services in the defined scope. And I think it's also good. One of the challenges we have from project and program managers is, well, what can they expect from us? And having a copy of the service catalogue helps them say, well, actually, how do we engage with the PMO? At least we know when we're setting off our projects, what things we're going to be delivered because they're mandatory, but also some of those kind of optional services that might be useful for, it might be more efficient for us to kind of use the PMO than ourselves. So there are many users of the service catalogue, but this is essentially an outward facing document about what our PMO does. So very short and sweet in terms of hopefully kind of gives you some insight into that PMO service catalogue. But I also hope it's inspired you to start thinking about, well, actually, you know, this whole kind of service-based PMO is something we've been thinking about, or even if you're in a kind of a service-based PMO, but you've not kind of gone to the nth degree, I think it's a challenge for everybody to actually kind of go away and think about a service that you currently provide and try and create an entry for a PMO service catalogue. So you may not have a service catalogue, but just try and create the PMO service catalogue using the fields that are in the book, or if you we can add when you get the recording, you'll have those lists of those fields. So try and just create a service catalogue entry. And I think the important bit for me, the real kind of learning bit from this, is that second point, is just to be able to reflect on which fields we found really difficult to complete. And actually, are there any fields where we wouldn't know where to start in terms of completing them, because we've not gone through that thought process? We haven't got the links to the why are we actually kind of delivering this service, just something we've also done. And hopefully that will help you start asking the questions as to kind of why, as a PMO, are we here? What is our focus? What is our purpose? What do our customers want? What does our organization need us to do for them to improve the delivery of projects and programs for them? So hopefully you've found that useful. We do, as ever, offer support for you as an individual from coaching, or as a wider organisation. We'll help you embed the service catalogue in your organisation. We've got a range of people who support and do some consultancy work with you to help you do that. We don't do the consultants who actually do the work for you, but we will support your organisation in helping you deliver your service catalogue. Any final questions? So while you're finishing your last mouthfuls of lunch before you do your quick troll around the block, any questions? Well, if you've got none today, you know where we are. So do get in touch at hello@pmolearning.co.uk. Or on upcoming courses, we're still delivering a few during the summer months. We've got essentials for administrators and administrators and analysts. But we've also got a P3O foundation, and I think I mentioned it a few times, our benefits management and the PMO course. If you want us to deliver them in-house, we're very happy to do so. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining. I hope you found it useful, and we'll hopefully see you in the classroom.